company that had gone up on the top of this mountain to build a development, an apartment development on the top of a mountain. And up until they'd come to build this larger community, there was a small community halfway up the mountain, but the road to that community was rather narrow. And one of the construction workers talked about one day when they were driving this huge piece of equipment up this narrow road to get to where they were about to dig up the ground. And they realized that the equipment that they had on their truck was so tall that if they took it up this narrow road, they were going to wind up hitting a balcony that was overarching the road of this house that was pressed up right against the road. And so this man describes getting off of his truck at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Imagine this happening to you. And knocking of the door of the people who own this little house with this balcony that shoots out over the road. And when the door opens, the man who's driving the truck explains, look, the company that I work for, they're going to be coming in a few hours and they're going to ask you about taking down your balcony because we have to get past your house. And I'm sorry that this is the situation. And while he's explaining this whole thing, the man who opens the door says, have you had your breakfast? Come on in. And they bring the man in and all of his crew workers, and they sit there and they have this extravagant meal. And this is very much part of the culture. And I imagine that maybe the reason that it developed is perhaps if you live in a desert, especially a long time ago, if someone doesn't offer you hospitality, you're probably in a dire situation because the Bible is written in a period of time long before there's Best Western, I guess, right? So I think that is probably the situation that Jesus' disciples are coming up against when they are on their way to Jerusalem with Jesus or in front of Jesus, and they knock at this door of a Samaritan. And they ask the Samaritans at their home if they would offer hospitality to Jesus and his disciples who are on their way to Jerusalem. Now there is a very long-standing tribal and religious animosity between Samaritans and Jews. And so when Jesus' disciples knock on the door and are refused hospitality by the Samaritans, probably what's going on is the disciples have explained that they and their teacher are on their way to Jerusalem to go preach and witness to the people in Jerusalem. And the Samaritans are thinking, well, look, if you're concerned about the Jews and you're going to go and set up shop in your ministry with them, then you can forget it, because those people are beneath our contempt. And if your ministry is to go be with them, then you can find your own dinner tonight. So this is more than just being dissed. This is a great big slap in the face. It's absolutely unheard of that you do not offer hospitality to the stranger. And so James and John are furious. And I love that James and John, like many of Jesus' disciples, have also received nicknames. If you remember, Simon's nickname is Peter, which apparently actually means rock, because Peter's head's like a rock, and he's also the rock on which Jesus is going to build his church. Does anybody remember what James and John's, they're brothers, they have a nickname together? Sons of Thunder. James and John are the sons of thunder. And no one can prove it, but some religious scholars have wondered if when James and John get so furious and they turn to Jesus and they ask, do you want us to rain fire down upon these evil Samaritans? Is this the moment when Jesus gives them their name, Sons of Thunder? And as you know, Jesus rebukes them, tells them to get a grip as they're on their way to Jerusalem. And then while they're on their way to Jerusalem, there is also a man who says, Jesus, I want to follow you, just let me go bury my father. And Jesus has this horrifying for us reply, which is, look, let the dead bury their own dead. But if you want to be my follower, you have to come and follow me. And so I do want to tell you a little bit again about the ancient world and the idea of burial in the ancient world. My understanding is that it's very much not like burying your father today, where somebody dies, you call the mortuary, the whole thing's over in a week. What happens in the custom of this period of time is that you bury your loved one, then you wait a year, and you exhume the body and you take the bones and you put them in an ossuary. So it's actually an involved process that takes roughly a year. And I think that when Jesus says this thing that is so brutal to hear, let the dead bury their own dead, and he rebukes John and James about wanting to rain down fire upon the Samaritans, he's really talking about the same thing. Both the raining down of fire and both the burying of the father have to do with spending time concerned with death. And when we want to rebuke those who have offended, one of the things that we're doing is we are facing not towards Jesus' mission in Jerusalem and not towards following Jesus, but when we want retaliation or vengeance, what we're saying in a way is that we've decided to stay still. And we're stuck in this cycle that has been going on since well before this story was put together in Luke, where we retaliate, where there's vengeance responds with vengeance, or we respond with resentment, or we feel as though because we have been harmed, it means that we are not, as people of faith, still called upon to be signs of life and witness in the world to the coming reign of God. We get stuck in this feeling of a need to retaliate. And also, Jesus, I think, is focusing when he tells the man that he should allow the dead to bury their own dead. First of all, I think Jesus is a member of the X generation because I think he's kind of sarcastic, like I am. And I think he gets frustrated like we do. But when he says, let the dead bury their own dead, he is moving towards Jerusalem. And he's telling people, whatever your reason is not to be able to come with me on my ministry to Jerusalem, understand that it is because you are turning your back, or you're coming up with a reason that you cannot follow me into life, into real life. And of course, what happens when Jesus gets to Jerusalem is eventually he winds up on the cross. And for people of faith, the cross is the end of retaliation. And it is the end for us also of thinking that death is the period on the sentence of our lives. What Jesus does on the cross for people who understand themselves to be Christian is say that the end of death is in him. He conquers death and moves us all into real life. And that we are freed up to enact life in the world, to call new possibility of hope into the world. And instead of constantly offering retaliation or being turned back towards a past that we wish we could change, as people of faith, we walk with Jesus through death and hopelessness and despair into new life. There is a theologian named Frederick Buechner who is one of my favorites, and he talks about how it used to be when you'd get an inspection sticker on your car, the back of the inspection sticker would say, drive carefully, the life you save may be your own. And Jesus, and Jesus, says Beckner, is basically saying the opposite of that. That the life that you try to save is not a life worth living. That it's a life that is given away, even recklessly, in love for the world, in the belief that we are moving not from life into death, but from life into real life. And so we are generous and we have an opportunity to give ourselves away. That is the kind of life that is actually being fully alive. One of the things that is going on across the river today is, of course, the Pride Parade. And my understanding is that it's going to be one of the largest ones that we've ever had. And we tread a very fine line, I think, today. Because, of course, one of the reasons that people are gathering is because we're all grieving over the people who were killed 3 weeks ago at the Pulse nightclub. But here is the fine line that we as people of faith need to be mindful of. That we make sure that we don't allow the deaths of the people who were killed in Orlando to define those people. They are not defined by their deaths any more than the people who were killed at Emmanuel AME Charleston are defined by their deaths. We as people of faith cannot allow death to have dominion over us. But we are sent out into the world to enact new life and call resurrection into being where there is despair and hopelessness. That's who the Christian people are. And sometimes that can be very difficult. But I think that the gospel text this morning assures us, when Jesus is talking about how he doesn't have a place to lay his head, this was not supposed to be necessarily an easy walk. Sometimes it is hard to bear Christian witness. But when is it more important to enact life and to offer gestures of resurrection in the world than right in the wake of times like this time? And because it's Pride Sunday, and because I'm a great big Wizard of Oz fan, I just cannot let this go without saying, if you remember when Dorothy winds up in Munchkinland, when Margaret Hamilton, who is really my favorite character in the whole movie, when the Wicked Witch arrives, first she says something about the horrible smell of sulfur, but she also says something else that's really important. She says to the witch, or in our case to death, "You have no power here. Be gone. You have no power here." Death has no dominion over us as followers of Jesus. And so, as we enter into a period of silence, we are going to have an opportunity to remember those who were killed at the nightclub 3 weeks ago. But I want you to remember, as you pray for these people and their families and friends, their death is not as important as their life. And life and love wins. And the way we make sure of that is that we follow Jesus forward into new life. And the way we make their lives mean something is by going into a world full of despair and fear and being a people of love and forgiveness and reconciliation and hope. Amen.